everyone. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. It's so nice to see some familiar faces. Hi, Charisse. Wow, what a treat. And Stacy, Charisse is my classmate from high school, so this is so cool. Really nice to see friendly faces because this can be a little nerve-wracking. And Stacy will be doing a presentation later this afternoon as part of the Grow With Us 808 I don't even know what to call it, the Grow With Us 808 intention, I guess. And our session is on distance learning.
We are presenting.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And also with someone else, Darren Chinen, if any of you work with Darren. So it's been really great to collaborate with Stacy and Darren on that. They've been awesome and I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so looks like I think I've let everyone in, so we'll just get started. Please bear with me as I share my screen, and feel free at any time, since this is kind of a smaller group, to just interrupt me and let me know if you have any questions. There's quite a bit of information I was hoping to share, so it can go a little fast. So please feel free to interrupt as we go or ask any questions. Okay, so hopefully you're in the right place. This session today is about how to really leverage Apple's ecosystems to take all of the great and possibly analog things that you're doing in your classroom and translate them into a digital format so that they can be utilized in an online environment. And part of what is not widely known is that the Apple ecosystem exists online in a cloud, meaning similar to how Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides exist in the Drive cloud. Apple also has an online version of their applications. So you don't actually need an Apple device in order to utilize a lot of their applications for creativity and the full functionality. So in today's session, essentially what we'll do is talk a little bit about how we evaluate tech utility, meaning how do you make those decisions about what you should and maybe should not translate into a digital format. And I know that the requirements are a little bit different because we're all talking about shifting into a fully online environment should the state again go to a work from home, stay at home mandate. So we don't necessarily have the option to consider at some point whether things should remain analog or whether they should be online, but it's something definitely to consider in the back of your mind as we start to explore some of these technologies, because it can be so easy to fall into that technology for technology's sake kind of mentality where we just want to get everything online and do everything with apps. And that's not necessarily always the best decision for our content. We will absolutely look at how do you create content in the Apple ecosystem and some examples of what that looks like from the student side and what that looks like from the teacher side. And then hopefully there'll be time for either a talk story or some Q&A at the end of this. So a little bit about evaluating utility, or another way of saying that is figuring out the valuation of a piece of technology or an application. And the essential question here is why tech? And it's almost like a double-edged sword. We have so much available to us. The students have so much available to them. And at least in my experience, we can fall into this working environment of everyone being almost in this digital or app frenzy, right? It's like, try this and try that, and this is great, and this is the best thing. And sometimes it can be so overwhelming that we really forget to take a step back and think about, well, what is our overall intention? You know, if it really is for students to collaborate or for students to elbow or reflect on each other's work, does that really only take place in Jamboard? Or can something else be used? Or should it even be digital at all? Right? And it kind of speaks to the fact that I'm sure a lot of us were feeling very zoomed out by the end of Q4 and just missing what a conversation over a cup of coffee felt like. And so that's kind of, you know, there's so much value in that simple act of just talking story in person. And I just don't want to forget all of the importance that happens in face-to-face interaction, or even with analog activities like taking notes with a physical pencil. And so I'm sure at each of our schools, we're kind of feeling like this, right? Every single person on every single email, every single day is talking about Nearpod and Pear Deck and Quizlet and Flipgrid and GoFormative and Kahoot and Loom and every other thing, that's supposed to help us in our classroom. And sometimes there can just be so much that it's hard to figure out what to use, when to use it, and why we would even use it. And then when we can't figure out the answers to those questions, it translates very literally into how the student experience is in our class. So I find when I can't answer those questions of why am I using this app and what am I really getting out of it, the students can feel that, because it feels like I'm like, today we're on Google Classroom and tomorrow we're going to get onto this Jamboard, and here I've added us all to this Seesaw account. And it just feels like so much all of the time. And so it's really important to take a step back and think about, well, what are we doing and why are we doing that? At the first step of utilizing technology, and I am not scaffolding this in terms of steps, meaning that we should skip the fundamental steps and really just advance to the creativity, but all of this is part of our journey as we grow in our understanding of technology. And so each sphere of comprehension that we'll talk about is really crucial and critical to learning how tech is going to play a role in your own personal classroom. So each of these levels is very important. And at the first level, it's really about enhancing the experience of the instructor, meaning we're starting to use online gradebooks, or maybe we use an online assessment tool. And what that does is it alleviates some of the logistical pressure for ourselves, therefore increasing our capacity to work with our students. And anytime we can have more capacity to interact, to reflect, to connect to our students, that is a very good thing. And then as we get more familiar with that, we start to think about, well, how can we enhance the student experience? Maybe that looks like taking a worksheet and scanning it, or taking a photo of it so that students can interact with it digitally or have access to it at home outside of the classroom. Or maybe if students are working on devices in the classroom, you're starting to create some assignments where students can either write with a stylus, or maybe they're typing things into a program. And then the magic really happens when we've started to digest, how does technology work for me? How does technology work for my students? And then how can I actually begin to design with the technology in mind? And so essentially, to paint a picture, what we're doing is moving from taking a worksheet, scanning it, or taking a photo of it, to really designing an assignment that leverages the technology and doesn't just take an analog assignment and put it online. So there's a very big difference between those two things. And one experience I had that really illustrates this, I think, well, was I ate at a restaurant on Waialae Ave called Restaurant XO. And there was this beautiful dish, and it was completely vegetarian. It just happened to be, but it was this green sauce with like a really yummy, warm, crunchy thing in the center. And the whole thing was made completely out of vegetables. And I think it was some kind of beet and pumpkin dish. And that dish, you could tell, was crafted to really bring to the front and highlight the vegetables, as opposed to maybe ordering a vegan chicken sandwich where it's a chicken sandwich and they're just using a meat substitute, right? So there's this idea of crafting with an intention and not letting things be an afterthought. And that's where, we really hope to go with integrating technology in our classroom. And something we can borrow from the field of architecture is really this idea that form follows function, or what you build should reflect the intention of what's happening within it. And we kind of take that from schools of architecture, where they talk about how the outside of the building, like the form of the building, should reflect the activities that go on within it, and also the way that business happens inside. So an example of that would be how windows on a first, second, or third floor might be designed and actually physically look different than the windows on the 17th, 18th, and 19th floor. And that's because the form of the building has to reflect the function of the building. And even the floor space within the building on different floors would reflect the kind of business that takes place inside. And so what we really want to do is kind of take that level of mindfulness and thought even though we're borrowing it from architecture, and really incorporate it into how we design our assignments. When the technology is an afterthought, it will feel like an afterthought. And I'm sure all of us can kind of think back to one or two moments in our own experience, maybe in a meeting or in a professional development, where you felt like the integration of the technology was just something kind of thrown on top, right? It was an aside, or it was an afterthought, and it feels that way. And it's not to say that the person creating these things does not have the best intentions. It just means that that intention needs to be reflected throughout the entire crafting process, from ideation all the way to implementation, for it to really be effective. Tech valuation is one good way to approach this. And we can always ask ourselves these questions like, who does this piece of technology serve? Is it myself? Which is not a bad thing, because we all know how hard, teachers and administrators are working, but we want to keep the end user in mind. What is the desired outcome? What other options are out there? How will this be implemented? How will I introduce my students to this piece of technology? Because if I've tried in the past to introduce something new within a couple of minutes, and then the outcome is very reflective of how little thought I've put into how I've implemented that tech in my classroom. And is this really useful? I was talking to a teacher the other day who said, she's so stoked because she is going to use, I can't remember if it was Jamboard or Seesaw, for her students to be able to post videos and comment on each other's videos, which in and of itself is great. But then the question really becomes, well, why do you want them to post videos and comment? If it's for reflection, there's probably a better way to do peer reflection than to have them post comments on some sort of social media platform. Or if it's to display their authentic work through the video, then there's probably a better way to make those videos viewable to a wider audience and really give them that sense of authentic stakeholders. So there's a lot to consider as we move through the tech valuation piece. Creating an Apple's ecosystem is one tool that we can really use to kind of do this mindful crafting. And what's great, again, about the Apple ecosystem is that it is available online. Students and teachers do not need to have an Apple device in order to do this. I'd really like to take some time to introduce the iWork suite for those of us that aren't yet familiar with it. And the iWork suite consists of Keynote, which is essentially slides, Numbers, which are spreadsheets, and Pages, which is word processing. The iWork suite can be likened to what Google has as a Google suite, in that Keynote is a slide deck, just like Google Slides. Numbers is a spreadsheet, just like Google Sheets, and Pages is for word processing, just like Google Docs. However, there are some really special functionalities to the iWork suite that the Google suite does not have. For example, in Keynote, it's fantastic for animation and teaching the fundamentals of storyboarding and visual storytelling. Numbers, you can delete the spreadsheet in Numbers, and it essentially becomes an unlimited whiteboard space that can hold many different types of media extensions, from video files to image galleries, to graphs and interactive charts. So that is very exciting about Numbers. And in Pages, there is a wide range of creative functionality with illustration, animation, shapes, and as well as direct publishing to the iBook store or to Google Play if you're interested in publishing student work. All of the apps in the iWork suite have some of the same functionalities, such as shapes. So you can put shapes into a Pages document in the same way you can put shapes into a Keynote document. They can all hold multimedia files, meaning image galleries, videos, photos, etc., drawings, and you can collaborate on all of them. So you can collaborate within the iWork suite apps just like you would on a Google Doc. We'll start talking about Keynote, which is one of my favorite apps, because Keynote is so much more than a slide deck. You can definitely teach the fundamental premises of animation and illustration within Keynote. Keynote has, I think, currently over 700 different shapes that you can choose from, all of which are completely open source. So anytime you or your students are illustrating or animating using Keynote, you never have to cite the source. They also take some of the best functionalities from other really expensive graphic design applications, such as Adobe Creative Suite. So you can do things like combine shapes, overlay shapes, move them around the screen, subtract out negative space to create new shapes, combine different colors, group them, and just really, there's an unlimited power to what you can create with shapes on Keynote. Another really great functionality to Keynote is that you can use Keynote to hyperlink different slides, and I believe the same functionality is available in Google Sheets, and this has been really great for app prototyping as well as presenting. So on the next few slides, you'll kind of see how that works. So pardon the graphic image, but this is an image of a cat dissection. And here on each different organ within the dissection, we've hyperlinked different slides. So for example, when somebody clicks on the lungs, it's going to take you to a slide of the lungs. And then if they were to click here on this green image, it would go back to the original cat dissection picture. And if they click here on this purple box, it will take us to a website about the lungs. So you can hyperlink different locations, whether that be websites or slides. You can take them through any different part of that image to go through small intestines, etc. Or if you're doing app design, you could mock up a screen and have students actually create buttons on different parts of their slide to click through and see what the UI or UX might be, the user experience and the user interface for the application. Magic Move is a function, it's an transitional function within Keynote that really teaches the basics of illustration and animation. So for example, you can animate individual shapes, change their color, and rearrange them to be something completely different. You can also animate the student drawing. So if they were drawing within the application, you can absolutely animate and illustrate those. It really helps to develop creativity within this app as students are allowed to break apart shapes and combine them to be new ones to really illustrate an idea. So for example, this keyhole and a key might become an ice cream cone and money to pay for it. Or a bunch of different strokes on a page might become something really great like Van Gogh's Starry Night. The basics of working with the animation and illustration are really simple. Essentially, what you're doing is creating two different slides and moving the shapes to their new place. So for example, in our picture here, we would just move the different shapes into their new location and choose Magic Move as the animation between these two slides. The application itself will automatically animate these shapes to move, and you would play with the velocity of the move by changing their location. So these are some examples of how we would use this in the physics classroom to illustrate problems, because students in my class have so much, they experience so much difficulty trying to conceptualize what is happening in different problems when we're talking about a change in position or a change in elevation, or how sliding down a ramp with friction will increase the time it takes to do something. And so this can be really powerful for you as the educator as well, to illustrate different problems your students encounter in your classroom. And I know that Explain Everything can do something sort of similar, but I just find that the animation with Keynote looks so high end without you having to, or without me having to know a lot about animation. So it really allows me to make something that looks like, pretty good quality without having to be great at drawing or illustrating. This video was absolutely 100% created in Keynote. So this is like a very advanced way of showing how you can use something as simple as a slide transition, which is what Magic Move is, to create a fully animated video. And these are the 19 slides that were used to create that type of animation. So at this point, I'm going to transition over to my other device to show some examples of what can be done in numbers and what can be done in pages. But are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions about Keynote or animation?
So it's pretty fast when you just click like duplicate slide or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. So you're clicking duplicate slide, and what you're doing is moving the object on the second slide, on the duplicated slide, to the new location where you would want it to be, and Keynote will automatically animate that transition. So if you want an object to move quickly, you might have it move to a position that's further away from its starting point, or if you want it to move slowly, its position might be closer to the original location. So you don't actually have the ability to change the velocity of the transition, but you can manipulate that based on where your object starts and where it ends. Yeah, great question.
Cool, thanks.
No, thank you for asking. Any other questions before we look at numbers or pages? Okay, I will just take a second then to share from my screen. Okay, great. So we will take a look at numbers. Numbers is such an underrated application. And I just, in the same way that Keynote is so much more than a slide deck because of all the animation features, numbers is so much more than a spreadsheet. And that is because within numbers, and this is a differentiating factor as compared to Google Sheets, you can actually delete the data table. And so what numbers essentially becomes is just a series of tabs with unlimited space that can hold many different types of media content. For those of you working on a device, like if you would access numbers from an actual Apple device, the one thing you have to make sure to do in order to be able to collaborate with students is that the file is saved on your iCloud drive and not on your computer and not on your iPad. So if the file is saved onto your device, you will not be able to collaborate with students. Like you won't be able to work on it in real time with them. As opposed to if you save it in iCloud drive, then both of you can log in and you can work on the same file. So that's the only thing to note if you're going to be working off an Apple device. Otherwise, if you're working off of numbers through iCloud.com, you don't have to worry about that because you will be working off of the cloud. So we'll take a look at numbers. One thing that I will share after the session is this kind of fully created PD notebook. So for example, within this numbers spreadsheet, and this was an example of a design thinking workbook that we did on paper airplanes. I am a terrible paper airplane creator, and that's what I've learned through this whole process. I don't know how to make a paper airplane. But essentially what we did was we created a new sheet, and for those of us that are new to numbers, we'll just click on new spreadsheet. I personally like to start with a blank template. I know there's a lot of templates down here for education, but I just find it harder to manipulate the template than it is for me to just start with a blank workbook and build what I want. So I always start with a blank workbook. And the first step to creating these notebooks in numbers, again, these can be like a gardening journal. This could be a design thinking notebook. This could be an engineering notebook. In upper school physics, we're using this as our lab notebooks. So these can really be any kind of books that you can imagine. But the first step is always delete that table. So now that I've deleted the table, I just have a completely blank slate and I can import anything I want. I can put shapes in here. I can put another data table. I can add an image gallery, photos, video, audio recording. Everything that I want can go into this book, and I can continue to make new sheets like pages, different pages within the workbook. So here within our paper airplane design thinking notebook, you can use shapes here to have the students brainstorm. So that might be a good way to have students think about, the essential questions to the class challenge. How do I build the best paper airplane? What materials do I need? I've also seen teachers use numbers to create storyboards because you can put in different shapes and have students illustrate or draw a picture of frames 1 through 3 of their video just to tell a good story. So in numbers, all you would do is add these different shapes here by using the format function. And so all of these colored shapes here are just rounded. I tend to like the rounded squares, and they're connected to one another through lines. And so students can tap on the screen or they can click with their mouse and they can move these shapes around and create as many different connections as they need to kind of tell their story or talk about their thought process. Another great function within numbers is that you can toggle on and off accessibility view, especially if you're working in Safari, if that is a browser that you have available to yourself. Clearly, I was looking at best movies on Netflix, but these smaller lowercase letters that were in the top left, when you tap on them, they activate reader view. And so for our students, including myself, sometimes I have a hard time when I'm doing web research of navigating between what is the important data and what are the distracting ads or pictures. And when you toggle reader view on, it will reformat the web page to not only have the right color scheme for our students that are working through dyslexia and dysgraphia, but it will also eliminate all of the distracting photos and it will change all of the font size to be the same so that they're not getting distracted by these smaller fonts and larger fonts. So you'll only have 2 different font sizes in reader view as opposed to maybe the 10 that you might have for hyperlinks and advertisements that will show up in the regular view. When you copy text from reader view into numbers, it maintains those same qualities. So you can see here the text that was copied over into our resources tab still has the color scheme to make it easier to read, and also the font size has been enlarged. So this is a great way for students to start to aggregate their resources if they're not yet ready to work through thorough bibliographies, etc. If you're working off a device that is a tablet style device, you can also have students drawing within numbers directly with a stylus. And if you're not, if you're working off the cloud and using a computer or a Chromebook per se, you can still activate the drawing function. You'll just have to activate it through the function, through the plus sign. So on the top right, when you press add something to numbers, down here on the far right, you have a media option. So this is where you would import photos or videos, a photo gallery, take a selfie, record audio, and you can also add equations and drawing. So down at the bottom, you see that the drawing function is available to you. And as soon as you click on drawing, students will be able to draw with their mouse pad, or their external mouse. So that is if you're not using a stylus on a tablet style device, you can still absolutely access the drawing function, which I think is really cool. Image galleries are one of my favorite things within numbers. And again, these are all available in Keynote and Pages as well. But image galleries really ask students to think through the process of documenting something and what steps do I really need to talk about and how am I going to talk about that data, right? Because if you can't communicate the data, it's almost as if the data doesn't exist. So students need to hone their communication skills, and thinking through that algorithm or that pseudocode of what steps do I need to document is a great way to do that. Here, students can add things like arrows onto their photos to show what the steps are or to highlight very important things in a photo. And this, what you're looking at here, is an image gallery. So if you were to tap the plus sign on the top right, or if you're working off a Chromebook or a computer device, you would just go to Media, Add Media, and select Image Gallery. And here, each image has its own caption. So the students can really work on, how they're going to communicate what is going on in each picture. So for every picture that the students have, there is an individual caption. So that is the differentiating factor between inserting one photo and inserting an image gallery. Each photo will have its own caption, but an image gallery will live in one place, and then you'll have to tap right to view the different photos within the gallery. Here in the test tab, you can see that we've incorporated a video of my paper airplane, which was not very successful, but I just, built the most basic one that I found on Wikipedia. But it's really great that students can incorporate videos. We found this to be really, really useful in the higher level, meaning high school sciences, where students have to document their work. And if something fails, they've got to actually run a risk analysis. So this kind of video documentation has been really, really helpful for us. Of course, you can add back in a data table. So in step 1, we're deleting data tables so that we have unlimited white space, but maybe at some point you want to add a data table back in. So under the plus sign again, you have options for adding different types of data tables and creating different types of charts that will respond as the students change their data. So as the students change their flight time or the horizontal displacement, they will see the bar chart starting to change accordingly. And that's a great way for them to understand what is happening as they change one variable in their scientific process. For the reflection tab, we just have the ability, or we have an example of the audio recording. And so here again, tapping under media, you see the option to record audio. And for some of our younger scientists or engineers or gardeners, this might be a great way to reflect on what they're doing in the classroom. What we found for our older students is that these voice memos are great for them to record notes as they go. Because essentially what happens is by the time, our older students get to the reflective process, it might be days since they've collected their data or measured the height of the plant. And so they don't remember exactly what they were thinking at the time. And sometimes it's too much to ask them to, put their device away or leave the computer in the classroom or in the computer lab and go get their notebook. And so recording these audio messages to themselves have been a great way to make sure that the students don't forget something that has happened somewhere along the way in their scientific process. And so that for us hasn't necessarily functioned as a reflection, though I can see it absolutely being that for, again, our younger students. So being able to record audio is, another one of the great media files that numbers can hold. Before we go on to pages, are there any questions about the functionality within numbers or, how you would do something?
Yeah, you mentioned Safari. Is that the only one that would work to access that function? Or that was just what you chose?
For the accessibility reader view?
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's available in Chrome, although I could absolutely, I want to say it is because accessibility is such a huge thing now in schools that I can't see Google not updating Chrome to have accessibility functions. I just personally haven't explored it.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, if there's no other questions, we'll go on to pages. So again, some of these functions might be a little repetitive, but that's actually a good thing because once students learn how to do something in Keynote, they can do that same thing in numbers and they can do that same thing in pages. So adding a shape or moving a shape or creating a data table is all the same in all 3 of those applications. So within pages, Pages has been a really great way to take a worksheet specifically and not just scan it and have the students work on it on a device, but to actually craft things that are interactive. And one thing that we had our students doing during Q4 was creating these portfolios. And I'm sorry, I don't know why they are not uploading right now. So I will just transition back here. Okay, so here we have an assignment in Pages that has been created to be a sort of book report. So again, this is a very simple and kind of fundamental way of designing an assignment that's leveraging the technology. So instead of having a book report that was maybe a couple of pages long and scanned to be accessible online, we've crafted something within Pages itself to be interactive. So here we have an assignment that is asking students, and this would be maybe more appropriate for an elementary to middle school student. We're asking the students to reflect on a book that they read. Within Pages, what has been really nice so that students don't mess with the formatting, because you know they love to move stuff around, is the lock function. So a lot of these text boxes or shape boxes are locked, and you'll be able to tell by the grayed X's that appear on the screen. So whenever you see these grayed out X's, that means that the object is locked and students can't change it. So the fact that book title here is editable is a good way to also communicate to students, hey, you need to actually change this box. This should say, you know, The Secret Garden, or whatever book the students are reading. Here, instead of having students describe the plot, we're asking them to take photos and to enter a series of images as an image gallery to describe the plot in their own words. So for example, if the plot of the story was a student that is having trouble at school and maybe experiences some bullying, and they have to then confront the bully, maybe the student is going home and asking their siblings or asking their parent to kind of get into certain poses that reflect that kind of conflict, and they're taking a series of images, importing it into this image gallery that you've created here, and then writing captions to describe the feeling in each of those scenes. You can absolutely still include some traditional work. So for example, here in the My Thoughts About the Book section, students would be typing in and finishing these 3 statements. I wonder, blank, I can't believe, etc., or I noticed, you know, about the book. So we're still having them go through the traditional thought process of what it really means to reflect on a piece of writing, but we're giving them a couple of different ways to express themselves. So for our students that are great writers, they might really flourish in writing their thoughts about their book, or for our students who maybe are still learning how to communicate ideas or working on their phonetics, etc., then they're really going to love taking photos and being able to still communicate their understanding about the story in a more visual way. You can even include videos within Pages. So again, similar to Keynote and Numbers, holding all types of media files. Here we have a video prompt that is going to ask students to think about good qualities about the book, or perhaps the things they didn't like about the book, and record a 30-second video, 30 seconds or less, a video recommendation of why they think someone should or should not read the book. So here they're working on their deductive reasoning and their logic and being able to communicate their ideas without necessarily having to write them out. So again, for our students that are still developing their communication skills in reading and writing, this is a great way for them to feel encouraged in their reading and in their process of sharing out with, you know, other people or their classmates. And we all know that students can never hear the instructions too many times. So it's always nice to include instructions for your assignments right within the worksheet. And the fact that students can replay your video or replay your audio file over and over to just remind themselves, okay, wait, what am I supposed to be doing on this assignment again, is really great. So that reinforcement with the text writing, with the photo, and with the video has been really wonderful for our students that are developing certain skill sets. Just for the sake of time, we've got about 10 minutes for question and answers, and I could bring up another Pages assignment that would be an example of what you might do in an upper level science or math class for our more advanced high school students. But would we rather go to like a Q&A or discussion as opposed to seeing the other Pages file? If not, I will just go ahead and pull that up here. Okay, so this, I'll just do this quickly so we have time for it all. This would be an example of something you might do in an upper level class. So it's still the same format, but what you're asking the students to do is different. So this is an example of assignment that we're using in physics that asks the students to really demonstrate their understanding of work and energy. So for each of these images in the image gallery, it's a different problem. So these images were created in pages. So the green squares and the blue ball and the dotted lines, those images were all created within pages. And then I've imported them here into an image gallery. So students have, I think it's about 10 different physics problems that they have to solve. And for each step, the answers are building upon themselves. So when they get to the final problem, they'll see that they need to put everything together in order to solve the problem. And their challenge, should they choose to accept, is to figure out this final piece of the puzzle, which is how far from the edge of the cliff of height h2 does the object get? And so here in the toolbox, I'm asking students to write down all of the equations they need. So they have to think through, their kinematics equations and their applied force equations, their friction equations, conservation of energy, and they can only use what they've put in that toolbox. So they really have to do a lot of planning here. And then in each of these subsequent pages, because our students are working off of tablets, I'm asking them to show their work for each of these problems in the space below. So here they are using their stylus with the drawing function, and they have to show all of their work. So this would be an example of the same template or same format being used for a different student. So again, the reading template might be something for elementary to middle school book reflection, but that same template can still be used for upper school science or mathematics. What's great about Pages is once you build these templates, you can save them as a template yourself. So the next time that you open up Pages and you say create a new document, if you've saved your assignment as a template, it will show up here in Template Chooser. And so you could always choose, Mrs. Oda's book reflection. That will always be a template for you to choose. And if you share that template with another student, when that student receives your shared document, it will pull up a pop-up on their own device that says, or on the school, the class computer that says, do you want to save Mrs. Oda's book template on your own template chooser? And if they select yes, then every time they access Pages, Mrs. Oda's book report will be a template that they can choose from. And the last function that I wanted to quickly go over is how you would collaborate with a student. So anytime you see this icon here, which is the person within the circle, that is the collaborate button. So similar to how you might add someone to a Google Doc, you would just click on that button and send them an invite here. So this is how you would collaborate with your students in real time on these assignments. Perhaps you're trying to grade their paper airplane assignment and you want to log in and see it. You would just ask your student to add you at the beginning of the assignment so that you can see their work as they progress through the different tabs. Thank you so much for bearing with me through that. I know that was a lot of information to get through in 45 minutes, but at this time, is there any questions about how to use the apps or some other types of projects that you want to explore?
Do you have any recommendations on, as far as getting started, just dive in, start doing it, or any go-to guides?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have a, if this is of use to us, we can, for example, I could share these Keynote assets. I wasn't really sure if this would be overwhelming or not, but there's definitely a step-by-step of how you would do these things. And there's also a bunch of resource videos that I filmed. So maybe like how to create shapes in Keynote, etc. And so there's a whole series of instructionals here. And if that's useful, I can pop that into the chat window.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Any other questions? In fact, I should do that now because I've realized I actually do not have a, okay, I actually do not have a list of attendees with your email addresses. So I better take a second right now and put those into the chat window. So if you don't mind bearing with me, I will absolutely do that. Oh yeah, Christy, that would be awesome. Thank you. So for, I guess I will, in that case, that would be great. So Christy, if you could, yeah, let me know the participants, then I can definitely share that Google Drive folder with everybody. And then in the meantime, that link that's in the chat window is a link to my YouTube channel that just has a bunch of tutorials just on getting started with Keynote numbers and pages, like how to make a new document, how to save a template, how to import a shape, etc., and kind of how to play around with stuff. But thank you guys so much. That was so much fun. I always love sharing out this information because I think it's not widely known that the Apple apps are available through iCloud. I think the general understanding is that people think you need to have an Apple device to access their apps, and you don't, right? So the iWork suite is absolutely available through iCloud.com in the same way that Google Slides, Google Sheets, and Google Docs are available on Google Suite, right? Online, in an online web app environment. But please feel free, if you have any questions about anything, to absolutely send me an email. I'd love to workshop an assignment with you. So if you have an idea and you want to kind of talk story or bounce ideas off, off each other, that would be great. I'm not sure if you have my contact email, but if you don't, I'll just add that into the chat also. So again, please feel free to send me an email with any questions. I'd love to chat with you about it. And thank you so much for spending this hour of your afternoon with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I can put the Logi link in the chat box if anybody wants to just click through rather than looking it up in your notebook. I'll put it in right now.
Perfect. Thanks,
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you so much for joining. Have a great afternoon.